Hey everyone, tonight we're going to step into a time machine, not to a grand battlefield or a royal court, but to a place far more intimate and, frankly, a little stinky, the Renaissance kitchen. Imagine the flickering firelight, the clatter of iron pots, the pungent aroma of drying herbs mixed with something earthy. You're a peasant in this world, and as you trudge home, your stomach growls with a primal, rhythmic ache. The air is thick with the promise of your evening meal, a promise that, in this life, always comes down to one thing. You can already feel the rough wooden spoon in your hand and the coarse texture of the bowl as you prepare to receive your sustenance. Your dinner awaits, and it is a bowl of thick, soupy, monotonous peas. It's a meal that has sustained your family for generations, a gruel that sticks to your ribs but offers little in the way of excitement. You probably won't survive this on your wit and charm alone. You'll need the humble pea. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you in the comments below. And please like and follow the channel to stay tuned for the next exciting parts. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You slump onto a low stool, your back aching from a day spent toiling in the fields, your hands calloused and cracked. Your wife sets a bowl before you, and you nod a silent thank you. It's the same as yesterday. It's the same as the day before. This isn't a meal. It's a ceremony of survival. The bowl contains peas porridge, a dense gelatinous mixture of boiled dried peas, sometimes seasoned with a bit of salt if you're lucky. It's the kind of dish that makes you grateful to be fed, but never truly satisfied. This peasant's life is dictated by the seasons, the sun, and the inexorable cycle of planting and harvesting, and the pea is the heart of it all. This humble legume is your primary source of protein, your calories, your everything. A mainstream historical fact you might not realize is that the average Renaissance peasant's diet was alarmingly low in fresh vegetables and fruits, making the nutritional density of dried peas absolutely critical for their health and energy. As you scoop a spoonful into your mouth, you consider the journey of this very pea. It was sown in the spring, a tiny, hard seed, a promise of future sustenance. It grew in a pod, then was harvested, dried, and stored in a rough sack for the long winter months. There's a quirky tidbit here. Some peasants believed that soaking the peas in water collected from a specific well on a full moon would make them more nourishing. A charming superstition, perhaps, but a testament to how deeply ingrained this food was in their worldview. Your entire world, your very survival, revolves around the success of the pea crop. A bad harvest isn't just an inconvenience, it's a death sentence. Historians still argue whether the widespread consumption of such a monotonous diet led to a kind of cultural stoicism among the lower classes. Was it a resigned acceptance of one's lot, or did it foster a quiet strength as you swallow another spoonful? You don't care about the scholarly debates. You care about the warmth in your belly and the temporary silence of its hunger. The taste is bland, earthy, and utterly predictable. It is the taste of your life. The mushy peas aren't just a meal, they're a symbol of your station, a stark contrast to the food you can only dream of. But as we're about to find out, those dreams might be a little more pea-filled than you'd expect. The world of the nobility, you see, isn't as free from this humble legume as you might think. Your bowl is finished, the hunger at bay for a few hours. You get up, ready to face the evening chores, your stomach heavy with the promise of more peas tomorrow. Your peasant's bowl is empty, its bland warmth a fading memory. But let's not linger in the straw-thatched cottage. We're moving up, way, way up. Imagine you've been granted a rare audience, or perhaps you've been summoned to serve in a noble house, a dramatic shift from your muddy fields. The air changes here. It's thicker, scented with beeswax, wood smoke from a grand hearth, and something sweet and savory all at once. The world of the nobility, you've always imagined, is a place of endless roasts, glistening gravies, and succulent birds. And for the most part, you'd be right. They do eat well. But the truth is, even at the highest echelons of society, the pea, that same humble pea from your porridge, makes surprising appearances. It's not the gruel you know, it's the same basic ingredient, but it's been transformed by alchemy. The nobility's diet is more varied, certainly, but peas still make their way onto the finest tables in ways you would never have imagined back in your village. For a Renaissance noble, a meal is a performance, a demonstration of wealth and power. To serve a simple, unadorned pea dish would be to admit a lack of resources, a failure of imagination. So, the pea is reborn. The peas you're seeing now are not the hard-won dried ones of your sustenance. They are often young, tender, and green, a different species altogether, brought to the table as a delicacy in the spring. A mainstream historical fact is that the cultivation of Mushy sweet green peas as a luxury vegetable for the upper class only became popular in the 16th and 17th centuries, particularly in France, where they were celebrated for their delicate flavor and vibrant color. This marks a clear division. The pea of the peasant is a hard, dried, brown staple, while the pea of the noble is a fresh, bright green ephemeral pleasure. And it's not just the type of pea that's different, it's how it's prepared. The noble's kitchen uses spices you've never even heard of. They mash the peas not with water, but with rich cream and butter. They sweeten them with sugar and honey, things you'd only see in a fairy tale. I mean, can you imagine a pea dessert? We'll get to that later, but just let the thought marinate. There's a quirky tidbit here about presentation. The cooked peas weren't just slopped into a bowl. They were often molded into intricate shapes or served as a vibrant green garnish for roasted meats, like little jewels on a crown of venison. They were designed to look good, to please the eye as much as the palate, which is a far cry from your bland, gray porridge. Historians still argue whether the noble's occasional embrace of the pea was a genuine appreciation for the vegetable or a performative act of slumming it, a way to show they could elevate even the most common ingredient to something extraordinary. Perhaps it was a little of both. As a noble, you would never openly admit to eating the same food as your tenants, but you would be proud to serve a pea dish so unrecognizable from its humble origins that it became a testament to your culinary prowess. The pea, in this context, becomes a blank canvas for the chef's artistry. It's no longer about survival, it's about status. It's about taking the mundane and making it magnificent. A commoner might see it as an extravagant waste, but to a noble, it's an investment in their reputation. It's a statement that says, my wealth is so vast, my taste so refined, that I can turn a peasant's food into a work of art. And as you watch a servant delicately place a tiny pile of bright green peas next to a perfectly roasted quail, you realize just how wide the chasm is between your world and theirs. The pea, it seems, is a mirror, reflecting the vast differences in their lives and yours. The pea is no longer just sustenance, it's a symbol. We've journeyed from the peasant's bowl to the noble's table, but let's rewind a bit, all the way back to the very beginning. Before the pea could be mush or a magnificent garnish, it had to be a seed, a tiny speck of potential in the dirt. You, as a noble, don't think about this much. Your food appears as if by magic, pre-prepared by a small army of unseen hands. But the true journey of the pea, from field to feast, is a testament to the complex, interconnected world of the Renaissance. A pea's life begins in the earth, and its destiny can lead to a king's table, a sailor's ration, or a poor family's stew. And each step of that journey involves a different person, a different class, a different set of hands. The process starts with the peasant farmers. They're the ones who work the land, planting the peas in long, straight rows. It's back-breaking labor, but it's a skill passed down through generations. A mainstream historical fact is that Renaissance agricultural practices were still largely based on a three-field crop rotation system, which helped prevent soil exhaustion Peas, being legumes, were especially valuable in this system because they returned nitrogen to the soil, improving the fertility for the next year's wheat or barley crop. This makes the pea not just a food source, but a vital part of the agricultural engine that kept the entire feudal system running. Your peasant tenants may have been poor, but they were the bedrock of your wealth and your survival. And the peas they grew were the foundation of both. Once the peas were ready, the harvest began. The peas were pulled from their vines and then dried, either in the sun or in special drying sheds. A quirky tidbit about this process is that in some regions, the peas were left to dry on the vine and then threshed with flails, a process that was often accompanied by singing and storytelling to make the monotonous work more bearable. These dried peas, hard as little pebbles, could then be stored in sacks for years, an essential feature for a time when crop failures and famines were a constant threat. The ability to store a stable food source for long periods was a form of security more valuable than any amount of gold. This brings us to a scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the development of more efficient pea drying and storage techniques contributed to the population boom of the early Renaissance. Was it simply a matter of a more stable food supply, or were there other, more complex factors at play, such as a decrease in the frequency of widespread diseases? As a noble, you wouldn't care much for these academic questions, but you would certainly appreciate the full sacks of peas in your storerooms, knowing they represented a buffer against famine and a tangible measure of your wealth. These peas, once dried, were then sorted. The smaller, less perfect ones might be kept for the peasants, while the larger, more uniform peas were reserved for the noble household. They would be taken from the storeroom to the kitchen, where their journey would finally come to an end, transformed from a simple seed into something that would grace your table. This entire process, from the dirt to the kitchen, is a chain of command, a system of dependencies that starts with the lowliest farmer and ends with the highest lord. And at every link in that chain, the pea is the common denominator, a simple object that holds the power to sustain, to nourish, and to define. The pea's journey has brought it from the fields to the castle gates, and now it's morning. As a young noble, your day begins not with the roar of battle or the weight of a crown, but with the subtle, domestic rhythms of your household. You awake in a great, canopied bed, the cool stone walls of the castle, a silent barrier against the dawn. But even here, in the heart of luxury, the senses are engaged in a familiar ritual. You can smell it, the deep, starchy scent of peas, a smell that permeates the air and promises the first meal of the day. This isn't the peasant's thin gruel. This is a more refined version, but its base is unmistakable. You get up, and as you walk to the great hall, the aroma grows stronger, mixed with the smell of roasting meat and freshly baked bread. It's a sensory experience that tells you, even before you see the food, that the day has officially begun. Breakfast for a noble is not the quick, utilitarian affair of a peasant. It's a structured meal, a social occasion, a chance to see who is present and what business needs to be discussed. As you take your place at the long, polished table, you see the food laid out before you. There are roasts of beef and pork, spiced sausages, and loaves of dark bread. But nestled among these more glamorous dishes is a large, steaming bowl of peas. They've been simmered with broth, seasoned with herbs from the castle garden, and maybe even enriched with a knob of butter. It's a far cry from the plain boiled peas of the lower classes. A mainstream historical fact you might be surprised by is that breakfast was not a universal meal for all of society. In fact, many people, particularly adults of the working class, would skip it and eat their main meal at midday. For the nobility, however, a morning meal was a way to start a day of business, hunting, or simply demonstrating their wealth. There's a quirky tidbit about this morning meal. Sometimes the noble's peas weren't just served in a bowl, but were mashed and formed into little cakes or fritters, fried in fat until golden brown. These small cakes would be an elegant finger food, a fun little treat to eat while you discuss the morning's hunt or the latest gossip from court. It's a clever way of taking a basic ingredient and making it more refined, more befitting of your status. The appearance of the food is just as important as its taste, and a well-formed pea fritter looks much more intentional and luxurious than a simple pile of mush. Historians still argue whether this early morning pea consumption was a conscious effort to mimic the peasant's diet in a more luxurious form, a kind of bizarre solidarity, or if it was simply the most practical and nourishing option available at a time when fresh vegetables were not always easy to come by. As you dip a piece of bread into the rich pea-laden broth, you don't think about these scholarly debates. You think about the day ahead, the warmth in your stomach, and the delicious mix of flavors on your tongue. The peas have been infused with saffron, a spice so expensive it practically screams I am rich, and the flavor is complex and wonderful. This is a pea dish that tastes of money, of power, of a world utterly separate from the one that cultivated the peas in the first place. This morning ritual sets the tone for the day, grounding you in a sense of comfortable routine and reminding you, with every bite, that your world, even in its humblest moments, is a world of abundance. Your morning meal, that comforting bowl of pea-infused broth, didn't just appear, it was the end product of a massive, bustling operation that is the noble's kitchen. We're going to leave the great hall now and take a peek behind the curtain into the heart of the castle where the magic and the madness happens. The air here is a thick, humid swirl of heat, smoke, and 100 different smells: roasting meats, bubbling stews, and yes, the ever-present, earthy scent of peas being prepared. The kitchen is a feudal ecosystem in itself, a microcosm of the castle's social structure, with a strict hierarchy and specialized roles for everyone from the lowliest scullion to the revered head chef. At the very top is the master cook, or head chef, a figure of immense authority and skill. They are often a man of some education, capable of reading cookbooks and managing a large staff. Your food, including the special pea dishes, is a direct reflection of their talent and their ability to source the finest ingredients. Below them are a number of assistant cooks, each specializing in a different type of food. One might be a saucier, responsible for gravies and sauces, while another might be a pastry chef, working on pies and tarts. It's a meticulous division of labor that ensures every dish is prepared to perfection. A mainstream historical fact is that in a great household, the kitchen staff could number in the dozens, with some of the largest households employing over 100 people to prepare and serve food. This wasn't just a kitchen, it was a small factory dedicated to a singular purpose: feeding the nobility. The peas themselves would be prepared by a variety of hands. A young kitchen boy or scullion might be tasked with the dreary job of soaking the dried peas, a job that could take all night. Then, a more senior cook would be responsible for simmering them in a great iron pot over the open fire. There's a quirky tidbit here: some head chefs had their own personal, secret recipes for pea dishes, passed down only to their most trusted apprentices. These recipes were a form of intellectual property, a source of professional pride, and a way to distinguish their cooking from that of a rival noble's household. Imagine a head chef guarding the secret to his special pea fritter recipe with the same intensity a knight guards his family's honor. Historians still argue whether the extreme labor division in these kitchens was a sign of efficiency or a symptom of the era's rigid social stratification. Was it a way to ensure the best possible meal, or was it simply another way to keep the lower classes in their place, performing the most menial and repetitive tasks? As you imagine the bustling, chaotic, yet perfectly organized kitchen, you realize that the pea, in its journey from a sack to your table, has been touched by many hands. The peasant who grew it, the servant who soaked it, the cook who seasoned it, and the scullion who cleaned the pot. Each person is a small, essential part of the puzzle. The kitchen is a testament to the power of organization and the surprising complexity behind even the simplest of meals. So, the next time you think about your food, remember that it's not just the final product that matters, it's the entire complex system that brought it to you. From the intricate hierarchy of the kitchen, we now turn our attention to the star of the show, the pea itself. As a noble, you've learned that not all peas are created equal. The mundane, brown, dried variety that sustains the common folk is a far cry from the delicate, sweet peas that grace your table in the spring. This is the world of culinary distinctions, where the pea is not just a food, but a reflection of class, taste, and global trade. We're talking about the haute cuisine of peas, a secret language of varieties and vintages that only the wealthiest understand. The peas you eat are often a specific type, carefully selected and grown. They are the cream of the crop. Literally, a mainstream historical fact is that while dried peas had been a staple for millennia, the cultivation of specific sugar peas, or mangutute varieties, which were eaten pod and all, became a mark of status in the 16th century. These weren't just about sustenance. They were about a sensory experience, the crisp snap of the pod, the delicate sweetness of the pea inside. To serve these in season was a signal that your household had access to the best seeds in the finest gardeners, a subtle but powerful display of wealth. Beyond the fresh varieties, the dried peas for your stews and porridges were also a step up. They weren't just any old peas. They were often older, more mature legumes with a deeper, richer flavor. Sometimes, they were even imported from other regions, giving them a kind of exotic quality. A quirky tidbit about this is that some nobles would serve pea dishes made from dried peas from a particularly good harvest years prior, much like a fine wine. This vintage pea was seen as a mark of a well-stocked larder and a testament to your foresight and wealth. Imagine a dinner guest complimenting the terroir of your pea pudding, discussing the sun and rain of a specific year as if it were a high-class vintage. It's a hilarious and surprisingly real picture of the noble mindset. Historians still argue whether this obsession with specific pea varieties was a genuine appreciation for taste or a form of conspicuous consumption, a way to show off wealth by finding luxury in the most unexpected of places. Perhaps it was both. As you listen to your father discuss the quality of this year's dried peas from the harvest, you see it's a genuine conversation. He knows the peas from the north are a bit starchier, while the ones from the south are sweeter. This isn't just talk. It's the kind of knowledge that comes with running a vast estate. He's not just eating peas. He's consuming a complex tapestry of agricultural history, trade, and culinary expertise. The humble pea, it turns out, is a more sophisticated and varied ingredient than you could have ever imagined from the perspective of a simple bowl of mush. It's a testament to the idea that, in the Renaissance, anything, even a single pea, could be elevated to an art form with enough money and creativity. We've established that the noble's pea isn't the peasant's pea, but what truly separates them? The answer, my friend, lies in a realm of sensory ecstasy and global trade. It's not just the pea itself that matters, it's what you do with it. We're talking about the transformative power of spices, sauces, and status, the culinary magic that turns the humble, earthy pea into a dish of undeniable luxury. The noble kitchen is a laboratory of flavor, and the pea is the perfect subject for its experiments. Your peas, whether fresh and green or dried and rich, would never be served plain. They are a canvas for a palette of flavors that you, as a peasant, could only dream of. The kitchen staff would have access to a veritable treasure trove of spices from across the known world. Cinnamon from Sri Lanka, cloves from the Moluccas, and black pepper from India. These are not just seasonings, they are symbols of your family's wealth and your access to vast, intricate trade networks. A mainstream historical fact is that during the Renaissance, spices were so valuable they were often used as a form of currency, or as a key part of a bride's dowry. To use them lavishly on a dish of peas was a bold declaration of affluence, a way of saying, I have so much money that I can afford to throw it at a bowl of vegetables. The pea mash might be flavored with saffron, that impossibly expensive crimson-threaded spice, turning the humble dish into a vibrant, golden spectacle. Or perhaps it would be sweetened with sugar, a commodity so rare and expensive that it was considered a spice in its own right and was used sparingly in dishes to indicate high status. There's a quirky tidbit about this. Some recipes from the era call for the addition of musk, a glandular secretion from a deer, to their pea dishes. This was an ultimate display of opulence, a scent so strong and rare that it literally screamed, "I am rich." It sounds a bit strange to us now, but in a time when sensory overload was a form of entertainment, this was the peak of culinary fashion. Historians still argue whether this extravagant use of spices was purely for flavor, a way to preserve food, or a more subtle form of social signaling. Was the nobles' palate so refined that they genuinely preferred the taste of musk in their food, or were they simply using it because it was a costly and therefore fashionable thing to do? As you watch your fellow nobles at dinner, you realize it's probably a bit of both. They genuinely enjoy the complex, sweet, and savory flavors, but they also revel in the fact that every bite is a reminder of their elevated place in the world. The pea, in this context, is no longer the star. It is the stage upon which a grand performance of wealth and power is enacted. The spices are the actors, the sauces are the scenery, and the pea is the humble, supporting player without which the show could not go on. The opulent, spiced pea dishes of the nobles' table are a constant, but there is one time of year when the pea takes on an even more central role, one dictated not by culinary trends but by religious devotion. We're talking about the fasting season, specifically Lent, a 40-day period leading up to Easter. During this time, the rules were strict: no meat, no dairy, and often no eggs. For a noble used to lavish feasts of roasted game and rich cheeses, this was a severe change of pace. But it was a change of pace the humble pea was perfectly suited to manage. With the usual sources of protein off the menu, the pea in all its forms takes center stage as a vital source of sustenance. As a noble, you would find your meals transformed. The great roasts are replaced with fish, and the rich sauces are now based on vegetable broths and vinegar. And the pea is everywhere. The thick pea porridge you've seen the peasants eat, once a dish you'd never touch, is now a welcome and respectable part of your diet. It's a pragmatic choice, really. A mainstream historical fact is that dried legumes, like peas, were a cornerstone of the Lenten diet for all social classes because they provided the necessary protein and calories without violating religious strictures. It was a time of forced equality, at least in the fundamental ingredients of one's meal. But even in a period of religious observance, the nobles' table found a way to distinguish itself. Your Lenten pea dishes would still be elevated, seasoned with expensive spices that were allowed, such as saffron and cinnamon, and perhaps even sweetened with sugar. There's a quirky tidbit here. Some of the more creative noble kitchens would create mock meat dishes out of peas and other vegetables, molding them into the shapes of birds or sausages to make the fasting period feel a little less restrictive. Imagine a pea sausage, seasoned with cloves and nutmeg, looking for all the world like the real thing. It was a fun, a little bit blasphemous way of dealing with the culinary monotony of Lent. Historians still argue whether the nobility's adherence to Lenten fasting was a genuine act of piety or a social custom they were compelled to follow to maintain their standing in the community. Was it a sincere religious practice, or was it a form of public performance to demonstrate their virtue to their peers and to their subjects? As you sit down to a meal of spiced pea puree and salted fish, you feel a certain amount of both. You are devout, yes, but you are also keenly aware that everyone in the hall is watching to see if you are following the rules. And the pea, in this context, is not just a food, it is a testament to your piety. A simple, unadorned thing that proves your faith is stronger than your appetite for a roasted quail. Lent, it seems, is a time when the pea is at its most powerful. A humble food that holds the key to both physical and spiritual sustenance. From the table of piety and performance, we're now moving into a slightly more scientific realm. In the Renaissance, the line between medicine and food was often blurred, and a physician's advice on what to eat was taken just as seriously as their advice on how to treat an illness. It turns out that the humble pea which has already served as a staple food and a status symbol, also had a reputation as a powerful medicine. The pea wasn't just for survival, it was for your health. Physicians of the time prescribed peas for a surprising number of ailments, from minor stomach complaints to more serious bodily humors imbalances. This wasn't just old wives' tales. It was based on the prevailing medical theory of the day, Gallenism, which taught that foods had certain properties, either hot, cold, wet, or dry, and that a balanced diet was essential to maintaining the body's four humors. The pea was considered a cold and dry food, and as such, it was prescribed for ailments that were thought to be caused by an excess of heat and wetness. A mainstream historical fact is that Renaissance physicians believed a diet of peas could help cool the body and prevent fevers, making them a common part of a sick person's diet. They were a food that was thought to both nourish and heal, a one-two punch of practicality and superstition. There's a quirky tidbit here about how the peas were prepared for a patient. They wouldn't just be served as a mush. They would be transformed into a poultice, a thick, warm paste applied directly to the skin to draw out sickness or inflammation. The peas would be boiled until they were incredibly soft, mashed into a smooth paste, and then sometimes mixed with a variety of herbs or even wine, depending on the specific ailment. Imagine a doctor telling you to apply a pea poultice to your swollen ankle. It's a testament to how deeply ingrained this legume was in every aspect of life, from the dinner table to the sickbed. Historians still argue whether the perceived medicinal properties of the pea were a legitimate, if unscientific, observation of its nutritional value or simply a product of the era's flawed medical theories. Was it the pea itself that was healing people, perhaps through its high protein and fiber content? Or was it the patient's belief in the treatment? It's a fascinating question, and one that highlights the complex relationship between food, health, and belief in the Renaissance. As a noble, you would have a physician on staff, and their advice would be a blend of practical observation and ancient theory. When you feel a fever coming on, you don't just reach for a bowl of pea porridge because you're hungry. You reach for it because you believe it will make you well. The pea, in this context, is no longer just food. It is a tool of healing, a humble but powerful part of your medical care. The pea's journey continues, and we're moving from the sickbed to the dining table, where it takes on a completely new role. Eating in a Renaissance noble's house isn't just about sustenance, it's a performance, a demonstration of grace, a delicate dance of social cues and unspoken rules. And when you're presented with a dish of mushy peas, you need to know how to eat them with the proper decorum. This is the table's etiquette. A minefield of social grace where one wrong move could mark you as a country bumpkin. You must master the art of eating peas with a knife, or, if you're lucky, with the newly introduced fork. As a young noble, you've been trained for this your entire life. You know how to sit straight, how to speak only when spoken to, and how to use the utensils that are laid out before you. A mainstream historical fact is that the fork was a relatively new and controversial utensil in Renaissance Europe, especially in England. Many people considered it to be an overly effeminate or Italian affectation, preferring to eat with their hands, a knife, and a spoon. So, when that bowl of peas is placed before you, the choice of utensil is a statement in itself. Do you use your knife, carefully scooping and balancing the peas on the blade? Or do you daringly use the fork, a two-pronged instrument that feels both elegant and slightly ridiculous? The challenge with peas, especially the mushy ones, is their lack of structural integrity. They are a test of your dexterity and your patience. A quirky tidbit is that some etiquette manuals from the era would offer detailed instructions on how to properly eat mushy foods. They would advise you to press the peas into a neat pile on your trencher, a thick slice of bread used as a plate, before attempting to scoop them up with your knife. This was a way of creating a solid base for the food, a neat little trick to avoid making a mess. It shows you that even the most mundane of tasks, like eating, was fraught with a kind of anxiety about social standing. Historians still argue whether the growing complexity of table manners was a natural evolution of dining or a deliberate way for the upper classes to distinguish themselves from the lower classes, who would never have to worry about such trivialities? Was it a genuine effort to make dining more refined, or a way of creating a series of secret codes that only those in the know could understand? As you carefully balance a few peas on the tip of your knife, you feel the subtle pressure. You can't let them fall. You can't make a mess. Every movement is watched. Every gesture is judged. The pea, in this context, is no longer just food. It is a test of your breeding, a small, round object that holds the power to either confirm or undermine your social status. We've seen the pea in the Great Hall, the kitchen, and even the sick room. But what about when the noble leaves the comfort and predictability of the castle? Life in the Renaissance wasn't always a stationary affair. A noble's duties often required them to travel, whether to visit another estate, attend court, or lead a military campaign. When you're on the road, the rules change. The kitchen staff is smaller, the supplies are limited, and the need for practical, non-perishable food becomes paramount. In this context, the pea's role becomes a matter of practicality and survival, bridging the gap between the refined diet of the castle and the simple fare of the open road. The pea, specifically the dried pea, is a traveler's best friend. It's light, easy to transport, and, most importantly, it won't spoil. A mainstream historical fact is that dried peas were a staple of a traveler's provisions because they were calorie-dense and could be rehydrated and cooked over a simple fire. You wouldn't be dining on delicate green peas sweetened with sugar. You'd be relying on the sturdy, brown variety, cooked into a thick, nourishing porridge that could sustain you for a full day of riding. This is a time when the nobility's diet, by necessity, begins to resemble the peasants'. The class distinctions blur, at least in the contents of your traveling satchel. There's a quirky tidbit about this that reveals the noble's enduring love for luxury. Even on the road, despite the limitations, some nobles would carry small amounts of expensive spices with them in a little pouch. This way, they could still elevate their humble pea porridge, adding a dash of pepper or a pinch of saffron to make the meal more palatable and to maintain a semblance of their status. It was a small act of defiance against the monotony of travel, a way of holding on to a piece of their home life even when they were far from it. It's a charming mental image, isn't it? A great lord, sitting by a campfire, carefully sprinkling a few threads of saffron into his pea stew. Historians still argue whether this reliance on the humble pea during travel fostered a deeper understanding or empathy for the plight of the common people. Did eating a peasant's food, even in a more luxurious form, give them a momentary glimpse into the reality of their tenants' lives? Or was it simply a practical choice with no social or emotional resonance? As you trudge along a muddy road, the smell of your pea stew wafting from the pot over the fire, you don't feel a sudden rush of empathy for the poor. You just feel the simple, comforting warmth of a meal that has sustained you and your ancestors for generations. The pea on the road is a great equalizer, a reminder that at the most basic level, everyone is just trying to survive. You've seen the pea in the Great Hall, the sick room, and on the open road. But let's shift our perspective now, from the noble's point of view to the peasants who make up the majority of the population. The relationship between the lord of the manor and his tenants wasn't just about taxes and labor. It was also a complex web of charity and social control. The pea, in this context, becomes a powerful tool, a way for the lord to demonstrate his benevolence, but also to maintain his power and quell dissent. Imagine a harsh winter. The harvest was poor, and your peasant tenants are on the brink of starvation. In a grand gesture of charity, the lord of the manor opens his storerooms and distributes sacks of dried peas to the villagers. It's a scene of immense gratitude, of bowed heads and muttered thanks. This act of giving is more than just feeding the hungry. It's a public performance of paternalistic power. A mainstream historical fact is that a food charity was a critical part of the feudal system, serving to reinforce the social hierarchy. The lord was seen as the provider, the protector, and the source of life itself. The peas weren't just food, They were a symbol of his authority and his grace. There's a quirky tidbit here about how this charity was sometimes organized. In some manners, the Lord would hold a grand ceremony where he would personally ladle out the pea pottage to his tenants. This wasn't just a practical way to feed them. It was a deeply symbolic ritual. It was a chance for the Lord to be seen as a kind of father figure, and for the peasants to be reminded of their place in the world. It was a public acknowledgement of their dependence on him, a subtle but powerful form of social control. Historians still argue whether these acts of charity were driven by genuine compassion or by a cynical desire to prevent rebellion. Was the Lord giving away peas because he cared about his tenants, or because a fed peasant is a much less dangerous peasant? The truth, as with most things in the Renaissance, is probably a mix of both. The Lord may have felt a genuine sense of duty and responsibility, but he was also a pragmatist. He knew that a hungry population is a desperate population, and that desperation can lead to revolt. The pea, in this context, is a kind of social contract, a promise of sustenance in exchange for loyalty and obedience. It's a reminder that even the simplest food can be imbued with immense political power. The pea's political power in times of famine is a vivid image, but its enduring utility comes down to one crucial fact: it can be stored. The Renaissance, you must remember, was a world without refrigeration. Food was perishable, and a good harvest was a momentary bounty that could spoil and turn to waste. The art of preservation wasn't just a kitchen skill, it was a matter of survival. And when it came to long-term storage, the dried pea was a superstar. The process of drying and salting peas was what made them a reliable food source year-round, turning a seasonal crop into an everlasting promise of sustenance. This process started right after the harvest. The peas, once shelled from their pods, would be spread out in thin layers on cloths or large trays, often on the roofs of houses or in dedicated drying sheds. The sun and air would do their work, slowly wicking away the moisture until the peas were hard as little pebbles. A mainstream historical fact is that this method of dehydration was one of the most common and effective ways to preserve food. Before the advent of modern technology, once dried, the peas were packed into large sacks and stored in cool, dark, and dry places like cellars or larders. This was a crucial step, as any moisture could lead to mold and ruin the entire stock. There's a quirky tidbit about this process. Some households, particularly in northern regions where the sun was less reliable, would smoke their peas. The peas would be hung in a small room over a smoldering fire, giving them a smoky flavor that added an extra layer of taste to the otherwise bland porridge. This was a way of creating a signature flavor profile, a regional distinction that made one lord's peas different from another's. It's a fascinating example of how even the most basic of tasks could be infused with a sense of local pride and identity. Historians still argue whether the ability to preserve and store food for long periods of time led to a more stable society, reducing the frequency of famines and thus the need for peasant rebellions. Did the dried pea, in its quiet and humble way, contribute to the political stability of the Renaissance? Or were famines a product of so many other factors that the pea's role was more a matter of mitigating individual suffering than of preventing widespread social upheaval? As a noble, you would see your well-stocked larder not just as a pantry, but as a vault. It holds your family's future, a hedge against a bad harvest or a long winter. The dried peas are a tangible measure of your foresight and your power. They are your wealth in its most basic and vital form, the promise of food when there is no food to be found. We've now seen the pea in its most utilitarian form as a preserved, storable staple. But let's take a dramatic leap from the dusty larder to the most extravagant setting of all, a royal feast. Here, the pea is not just a food source or a simple vegetable. It is a work of culinary art, a dazzling spectacle of opulence and creativity. This isn't just about eating, it's about theater. The royal feast is a public display of power, a performance designed to awe and intimidate, and the pea plays a surprising and prominent role in the show. Imagine you're a guest at the court of a king. The great hall is a riot of color and sound, filled with musicians, jesters, and courtiers in their finest clothes. The tables are groaning under the weight of an unimaginable quantity of food, and among the roasted swans, the glazed boars' heads, and the towering sugar sculptures, you see a dish that makes you do a double take. It's a pea dish, but it's been transformed into something otherworldly. The peas aren't mush. They've been pureed and then colored with exotic pigments, maybe a vibrant blue from indigo or a shocking pink from crushed cochineal insects. They've been molded into the shape of a castle, a royal crest, or some other intricate sculpture, a masterpiece of culinary engineering. A mainstream historical fact is that food and spectacle were deeply intertwined in royal court during the Renaissance. Elaborate, inedible or barely edible food sculptures, known as subtleties, were a common feature of these feasts. These could be made from sugar, marzipan, or, in this case, colored and molded pea puree. They were designed not for consumption, but to impress guests with the wealth and artistic skill of the host. The pea, in this context, is a blank canvas, a humble ingredient elevated to the height of artistic expression. There's a quirky tidbit here about the moving subtleties. Some of these pea sculptures weren't just static objects. They were mechanized. They would have little clockwork mechanisms inside that would make them spin or even bow to the king when presented. It was an incredible feat of engineering and a stunning display of wealth, all for a dish that might not even be eaten. Historians still argue whether the extreme opulence of these feasts and the use of the pea as a showpiece was a sign of a vibrant, creative culture or a decadent and wasteful excess. Was it a celebration of art and ingenuity, or was it a symptom of a deeply unequal society where food was a tool of oppression and social control? As you stare at the pea-sculpted castle, you can't help but feel a mixture of awe and unease. The pea, in this setting, is a symbol of both. It's a testament to the incredible ingenuity of man, but also a stark reminder of the vast gulf between the king who can afford to turn a peasant's food into a work of art and the peasant who is just trying to survive on it. The pea, it seems, can be many things to many people, but at a royal feast, it is an unequivocal symbol of power. We've now witnessed the pea in its most extravagant form as a royal spectacle, and in its most basic form as a peasant's gruel. It's time to step back from the specific scenarios and consider the pea in a broader, more philosophical sense. What does this simple legume, this round, green, or brown sphere, actually symbolize in the Renaissance worldview? The pea, it turns out, is a fascinating symbol of sustenance and social class, a physical representation of the interconnectedness of society and the vast differences within it. To the peasant, the pea is a symbol of survival. It's the difference between a hungry stomach and a full one, between a long winter and a longer, more desperate one. It represents the brutal, cyclical reality of their life, the planting, the harvesting, and the enduring hope for a good yield. A mainstream historical fact is that the stability of the food supply, particularly staples like peas and grains, was a primary concern for the vast majority of the population. A bad harvest wasn't just a financial setback, it was an existential crisis. The pea, in this context, is a promise, a contract with the earth itself that says, if you work hard, you will be fed. To the noble, the pea represents something entirely different. It is a symbol of abundance and power. The noble's well-stocked larder, filled with sacks of peas, is a tangible sign of their wealth and their ability to command the labor of others. It's a reminder that they are the ones who control the means of production, who own the land where the peas are grown. There's a quirky tidbit here. Some nobles would use the pea in their coats of arms or family crests, often in a stylized form, to represent the wealth of their land or the bounty of their fields. The pea, a symbol of life for the peasant, becomes a symbol of lineage and status for the noble. Historians still argue whether the stark contrast in the symbolic meaning of the pea survival for one class, abundance for another, was a conscious part of the social order or an organic byproduct of a deeply unequal society. Was it a deliberate way of keeping the lower classes in their place, or a simple reflection of the economic realities of the time. As you look at a pea, whether in a peasant's bowl or a noble's decorative dish, you can see both truths at once. The same object, a single pea, can hold two completely different meanings, two completely different worlds. It's a reminder that a symbol is not just about the object itself, but about the context in which it is viewed. The pea is a mirror, and what it reflects is the fundamental structure of Renaissance society itself. The symbolic weight of the pea is a fascinating concept, but how did we get here? The food culture of the Renaissance didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was a long and sometimes messy evolution from the medieval diet that came before it. If you want to understand the peas on your Renaissance plate, you first have to understand the food of the medieval era, a world that was both simpler and, in some ways, even more brutal in its reliance on a few key staples. The medieval diet, especially for the lower classes, was a monotonous and often scarce affair. The mainstays were grains, rye and barley and legumes, with the pea and the broad bean being the most common. A mainstream historical fact is that peas pottage was a daily food for most peasants, a thick porridge made from dried peas that was often cooked in a large pot over the fire and eaten throughout the day. This was a diet of survival, where the goal wasn't flavor or variety, but simply to fill your stomach with enough calories to get through the day's labor. It was a world of hard bread, boiled root vegetables, and this ubiquitous, thick pea mush. There's a quirky tidbit about the medieval kitchen. The peas pot was often a permanent fixture on the fire, a sort of perpetually simmering stew. New ingredients would be added as they became available, but the base of the stew was always the same dried peas. This means that a single pot of peas could be cooking for days, even weeks, with new water and peas being added to it as it was consumed. It sounds a bit gross to us now, but it was a practical way of ensuring there was always a hot meal available. Historians still argue whether the increased culinary creativity and access to new ingredients in the Renaissance was a result of a growing middle class and a more stable economy, or if it was a more gradual, organic evolution of taste and technique. Was the Renaissance a sudden food awakening, or just a more refined version of the same old habits as a noble? You would have an immense appetite for the new and exotic. You would be looking for ways to distinguish your table from the simpler fare of the past, and the pea, once a symbol of medieval monotony, becomes a blank canvas for your chefs to work their magic. The pea is the perfect link between the two eras, a bridge from the old world of a simple survivalist diet to a new world of culinary exploration. The evolution from the medieval diet to the Renaissance table is a journey of increasing sophistication, and nowhere is that more apparent than in the surprising places the pea began to turn up. We've established that peas are not just a simple mush, but they were also finding their way into the most unexpected of dishes, blurring the lines between savory and sweet. We're talking about pea-filled puddings and pies, Sarah, a culinary frontier where the humble legume was reimagined as a central ingredient in pastries and desserts. Imagine you're at a grand banquet. The main courses have been cleared, and a procession of sweet treats is being brought out. Among the fruit tarts and custards, you see a magnificent towering pie. You assume it's filled with fruit or perhaps a rich, sweetened custard. But when the servant slices it, you see a vibrant green filling. It's peas. This wasn't a joke, it was a delicacy. A mainstream historical fact is that in the Renaissance, sugar was still a new and incredibly expensive commodity, and it was used to create elaborate and often surprising dishes. Cooks would mix boiled and mashed green peas with sugar, spices like ginger and cinnamon, and rich cream to create a sweet filling for pastries and puddings. These weren't just peasant food, they were the height of culinary experimentation. There's a quirky tidbit here about the presentation of these pies. The peas weren't just a filling, they were often molded into intricate shapes or dyed vibrant colors with food coloring derived from plants and insects. These pies were as much about visual spectacle as they were about taste. They were a playful and artistic way of showing off your wealth and your chef's skill. a testament to the idea that anything, even a humble pea, could be turned into a masterpiece. Historians still argue whether this trend of putting peas in desserts was a genuine evolution of taste or a strange form of culinary showmanship. Was the goal to create something truly delicious, or was it a form of conspicuous consumption, a way of using a common ingredient in a completely uncommon and therefore luxurious way? As you take a bite of the pea pudding, you are struck by the strange but not unpleasant combination of sweet and earthy flavors. It's a taste that speaks of a world in transition, a world that is moving from a focus on mere sustenance to a focus on pleasure and spectacle. The pea, it seems, is a shapeshifter, an ingredient that can be whatever the cook, with enough imagination and resources, wants it to be. From the surprising world of pea-filled desserts, we now shift our focus back to the source of the garden. For a noble household, the kitchen garden wasn't just a place to grow food, it was a curated space, a testament to horticultural knowledge and a source of immense pride. This is where the magic of the pea truly begins, where prized pea varietals are meticulously tended, and where the line between a food source and a hobby blurs. Your family's garden is a reflection of your status, and the peas grown within it are not the common, field-grown legumes of the peasantry. Imagine a walled garden, protected from the elements and the hungry mouths of animals. The soil is rich and well-tended, and the rows of pea plants are staked with care, their delicate vines reaching for the sun. A mainstream historical fact is that Renaissance nobles and wealthy landowners often employed a master gardener, whose job was to cultivate a wide variety of herbs, vegetables, and flowers, often for specific culinary or medicinal purposes. This wasn't just a simple farmhand, this was a skilled professional who knew how to select the best seeds, graft plants, and manage pests. Their knowledge was a valuable asset, and their creations, like a particularly sweet or tender variety of pea, were a source of immense pride. There's a quirky tidbit here about the names of these new pea varieties. Nobles and gardeners would often name them after themselves or their families, turning a simple vegetable into a kind of living monument. You might have the Duchess of Alba's delight pea or the Montague's marvel pea, each one a testament to a specific family's wealth and good taste. It's a charming and deeply personal way of engaging with food, turning a simple act of cultivation into a form of self-expression. Historians still argue whether this cultivation of specialized pea varieties was a genuine effort to improve agriculture or a form of elitist exclusivity. Was the goal to create better food for everyone, or was it a way of keeping the best and most delicious vegetables for the upper class? As you walk through your family's garden, you see it as a beautiful and productive space. You don't think about the politics of it, you just see the rows of plump pods, a promise of fresh, delicious peas to come, a luxury that you know is a world away from the hard, dried peas of the peasants in your fields. The garden, it seems, is a place where nature is tamed and refined, and the pea is its perfect subject. The pea's journey from a noble's garden to their plate is a story of meticulous cultivation, but before it can even get to the garden, it often has to travel. This brings us to a whole new player in our story, the merchant. The pea, in this context, is not a food or a symbol, but a commodity, a source of wealth for merchants who traded across the continent. The pea, it turns out, is a cog in the great machine of international commerce, a surprising driver of a burgeoning mercantile class. Imagine a bustling port city, a place of 1,000 different smells and sounds. Ships from all over Europe are docked, unloading their precious cargo, and among the silks, spices, and wines are sacks upon sacks of dried peas. A mainstream historical fact is that the international grain and legume trade was a vital part of the Renaissance economy. Peas, being non-perishable and calorie-dense, were a perfect commodity for long-distance trade. A merchant could buy a large quantity of peas in one region after a good harvest and sell them at a massive profit in a region that had suffered a crop failure. This was a risky business, but the potential for profit was immense. There's a quirky tidbit here about the pea boats themselves. Some merchants would outfit their ships specifically for the transport of legumes, lining the holds with special ventilated sacks to prevent the peas from rotting during the long journey. They would even have special crews whose sole job was to monitor the cargo, ensuring the peas arrived in good condition. The pea, in this context, wasn't just a food, it was a payload, a valuable cargo that required a specialized infrastructure to transport. Historians still argue whether the rise of this merchant class, built on the trade of commodities like the pea, was the primary driver of the Renaissance's economic growth. Did the pea, in its quiet way, help to fund the great art and architecture of the era? Or was it just one small part of a much larger economic shift? As a merchant, you wouldn't care much for these academic questions. You would care about the price of peas in Milan versus the price of peas in London. You would be a master of supply and demand, a true capitalist in a feudal world. The pea, it seems, can be a peasant's survival, a noble's luxury, and a merchant's fortune, all at the same time. The pea's journey as a commodity and a source of wealth is a testament to the changing economic landscape of the Renaissance. But as money and trade flowed, so did ideas and inventions. And a small, seemingly insignificant object began to change how the nobility ate their peas, the ornate fork. The culinary revolution brought about by new utensils was slow, but it was fundamental, and it made the messy, mushy pea a subject of great debate and social anxiety. Imagine you are a noble in the 16th century, a guest at your table, a visitor from Italy, pulls out a strange, two-pronged instrument. This is a fork. You've seen them before, but they are still a novelty, and a slightly suspicious one at that. A mainstream historical fact is that the fork was introduced to Europe from Byzantium and was initially met with great skepticism and even hostility. The English in particular viewed it with suspicion, and it would take centuries for it to become a standard part of the table setting. Many considered it an unnecessary affectation, a sign of weakness or femininity. Your own father would likely still prefer to use his knife and fingers, a more masculine and traditional way of eating. The fork one, however, was perfect for the fussiness of the pea. It was the ideal tool for picking up those small, round legumes without them rolling off a knife blade or getting squished by fingers. A quirky tidbit is that the early forks were often only two-pronged, making them less than ideal for spearing a single pea. This led to a kind of tableside game, a small, quiet struggle to get the peas from the plate to the mouth without a mishap. It was a subtle but hilarious test of dexterity and grace, a new layer of social pressure added to the already fraught ritual of the dinner party. Historians still argue whether the adoption of the fork was a genuine improvement in table manners or simply another way for the nobility to distinguish themselves from the lower classes. Was it about making dining more clean and refined? Or was it about creating a new set of rules that the common folk couldn't possibly know? The fork, it seems, can be a symbol of both progress and elitism. As you watch your Italian guest gracefully pick up a pea with his fork, you can't help but be a little impressed and a little envious. It's an elegant solution to a very messy problem. And you know, deep down, that it's only a matter of time before these strange little instruments become a permanent fixture on your table, changing forever how the nobility eats their peas. The fork's slow conquest of the noble's table is a testament to the changing world of the Renaissance. But it's not just the dinner table where ideas were evolving. The pea, that humble legume, also found its way into the intellectual currents of the time. The rise of humanism and a renewed interest in classical texts meant that scholars and physicians were re-examining everything, from astronomy to zoology, and yes, even to botany and herbalism. This is the world of the Mushy scholars' study. A quiet, book-lined room where the pea was not a food, but a subject of intellectual inquiry. Imagine a scholar hunched over an ancient text, a book on botany by the Greek physician Dioscorides. They're not just reading it, they're annotating it, comparing the old wisdom with their new observations. A mainstream historical fact is that Renaissance scholars and herbalists created lavishly illustrated herbal manuscripts that documented a vast array of plants, their properties, and their medicinal uses. The pea, in its various forms, would have a prominent place in these texts. The scholars would meticulously describe the pea plant, its flowers, its pods, and its seeds, often with an incredible attention to detail. There's a quirky tidbit here about the illustrations in these books. The artists who drew the plants didn't just draw them realistically, they would often imbue them with symbolic meaning. A pea vine might be drawn to look like a climbing, striving figure, representing the pea's ability to grow and flourish. It was a beautiful and subtle way of merging art and science, a testament to the Renaissance's love for both. Historians still argue whether the increased scholarly interest in plants like the pea was a genuine scientific pursuit or a more practical effort to find new and better medicines. Was the goal to understand the natural world for its own sake, or was it a more utilitarian drive to improve health and prolong life? As you flip through a beautiful herbal manuscript, you can see both motivations at play. There's a genuine love for the natural world in the intricate drawings and detailed descriptions, but there's also a pragmatic sense of purpose in the long lists of ailments that the pea is said to cure. The pea, it seems, is a bridge between the ancient world of classical wisdom and the new world of empirical observation, a simple plant that holds the key to both knowledge and health. From the quiet intellectual world of the scholar's study, we are now going to take a surprising turn and enter the world of courtly love. This is a universe of knights and ladies, of poetry and chivalry, where every gesture and every object is imbued with a hidden meaning. And in this world of high romance and elaborate social games, the pea, that humble legume, sometimes makes a fanciful and symbolic appearance. It's a connection that sounds ridiculous at first, but it speaks to the Renaissance's love for turning the mundane into the magnificent. Imagine a grand courtly event, a feast or a ball. A young knight is trying to win the favor of a noble lady. He might not give her a pea directly. That would be a bit strange, but he might present her with a small dish, a sweet pea dish, that has been prepared especially for her. This is not about the food itself, but about the symbolism behind it. A mainstream historical fact is that in courtly love, food was often used as a metaphor for love and affection. A sweet pea dish, with its delicate flavor and beautiful color, could be a symbol of the young lady's sweetness and beauty. It was a subtle, poetic way of expressing one's admiration without being overly forward. There's a quirky tidbit here about a game that was sometimes played at courtly gatherings. Called the pea in the pod, a young man would offer a woman a pea pod, and she would have to guess how many peas were inside. If she guessed correctly, it was a sign of good fortune for their courtship. It's a silly, charming game that shows how a simple vegetable could be integrated into the elaborate social rituals of the court. It was a way of using a common object to create a moment of intimacy and playful fun in a very formal setting. Historians still argue whether these courtly rituals were a genuine expression of romantic feeling or a highly stylized and impersonal social game. Were the knights and ladies truly in love, or were they just playing a role? The pea in the pod, in this context, is a kind of Rorschach test for the Renaissance mind. You can see it as a symbol of genuine affection and hope, or you can see it as a shallow and cynical part of a social hierarchy built on appearance and performance. As you watch the young knight and the lady laugh over a pea pod, you can't help but be a little charmed, even if you suspect that the whole thing is just a game. The pea, it seems, can be a symbol of love, a testament to the idea that even the most basic of things can be a part of the grand romantic narrative. The world of courtly love, with its fanciful pea games, is a testament to the Renaissance's love for turning the mundane into the magnificent. But as the 15th and 16th centuries wore on, the world itself was getting bigger. The age of exploration was in full swing, and ships were sailing to a new world, a continent teeming with new plants and animals. This new era, with its influx of foreign goods, would eventually have a profound impact on the pea and on food culture in general. The introduction of new foods would eventually compete with the pea for a place on the noble's table and on the peasant's plate. Imagine the excitement in the Great Hall as a merchant, recently returned from a voyage to the Americas, presents the Lord with a strange new vegetable. It's a large yellow sphere, and he calls it a potato. It doesn't look like anything you've ever seen before. A mainstream historical fact is that while new crops from the Americas, like potatoes and tomatoes, were introduced to Europe during the Renaissance, they were initially met with suspicion. Many people, particularly the lower classes, were afraid to eat them, believing they were poisonous or that they caused disease. It would take a long time, sometimes centuries, for these new foods to become staples in the European diet. There's a quirky tidbit here about the initial reaction to the potato. It was often grown in botanical gardens as a curiosity, a strange and exotic plant, rather than as a food source. Some nobles, in a display of their wealth and their access to the New World, would even serve small, decorative dishes of these new vegetables at their feasts, more as a conversation piece than as a genuine part of the meal. The pea, in this context, is the old guard, the familiar, reliable food that has sustained your family for generations. The new foods are the upstarts, the exotic strangers that may or may not be here to stay. Historians still argue whether the eventual widespread adoption of New World crops like the potato was a cause of the demographic changes in Europe. Did the potato, with its high yield and nutritional value, help to fuel a population boom? Or was it simply a convenient food source for a population that was already growing for other reasons? The question is a big one, but it all started with these first hesitant steps. The pea, in this context, is no longer the star of the show. It is the reigning champion, but it has a challenger, a new food from a new world that will eventually change the way everyone eats forever. The introduction of new foods from the Americas was a subtle, slow change, but we are now going to shift to a much more dramatic and immediate conflict, one where the pea is not a curiosity, but a point of contention. We've talked about the pea as a symbol of charity, but what happens when that charity fails? We're going to explore the Autumn Peasants' Uprising, a moment in history where hunger, taxes, and the ever-present pea came together in a dangerous and violent way. Peasants didn't just quietly accept their fate. Sometimes they fought back, and often the cause was a failed harvest or an unjust tax. Imagine a village in the throes of a long, cold winter. The pea harvest was poor, and the Lord's granaries are full, but he has not offered to help. The price of food has skyrocketed, and your family is on the verge of starvation. This is a moment of desperation, a time when the social contract between the Lord and his tenants breaks down. A mainstream historical fact is that many peasant revolts throughout the Renaissance and medieval periods were directly tied to famine and unfair taxation on food. The peasants would rise up not because they wanted to overthrow the entire social system, but because they simply wanted to survive. They would raid the Lord's granaries, steal his cattle, and sometimes even burn down his manor house, all in the name of basic sustenance. There's a quirky tidbit here about the symbolism of the pea in these revolts. Sometimes the peasants would carry banners or flags with a pea pod on them, a symbol of their hardship and their fight for food. The pea in this context is no longer a food. It is a symbol of a movement, a rallying cry for the oppressed. It was a powerful and poignant image, a reminder that the most basic of needs can be the spark that ignites a revolution. Historians still argue whether these peasant revolts were genuine attempts at social change or simply desperate outbursts of a people with no other recourse. Were the peasants trying to create a more equal society, or were they just trying to feed their families? The pea, in this context, is a kind of historical flashpoint. It's a reminder that beneath the glittering surface of the Renaissance, with its art and its poetry and its new foods, there was a constant, simmering tension. The pea, it seems, is a barometer of social health, a simple food that holds the power to either keep the peace or to start a war. The taste of that pea for a desperate peasant is not just the taste of food, it's the taste of injustice. The Peasants' Uprising, with its symbolic pea banners, is a stark reminder of the social tensions simmering beneath the surface of the Renaissance. But let's move from the roar of the crowd to a more intimate and sensory experience, the scent of status. In an era before modern hygiene, smell was an incredibly powerful social signal. The aromas of a noble's kitchen, with its complex mix of musk, spice, and pea soup, were not just a byproduct of cooking. They were a deliberate and luxurious declaration of wealth, a world away from the simple, earthy smells of a peasant's hearth. Imagine entering a great hall. The air is not just filled with the scent of food, but with a tapestry of odors that tell a story of immense wealth. The smell of roasting meats is there, of course, but it's layered with the sharp, sweet smell of cinnamon and the deep, exotic aroma of cloves. And underneath it all, you smell the rich, savory scent of a pea puree, thick with cream and butter. A mainstream historical fact is that in the Renaissance, perfumes and spices were used not just for pleasure, but to mask the unpleasant smells of unwashed bodies and poor sanitation. The wealthy could afford to use these expensive scents, and the smell of their homes and their food was a clear signal of their elevated status. There's a quirky tidbit here about the use of musk, a glandular secretion from a deer. As we mentioned before, it was sometimes added to food, but it was also a popular perfume and a scent used to perfume a room. The musk, and with its powerful animalistic aroma, was the ultimate display of opulence. The air in a noble's house would be filled with this powerful scent, a kind of olfactory armor against the smells of the outside world. Historians still argue whether the noble's obsession with strong, complex scents was a genuine love for the aromas or a form of social signaling, a way of creating a sensory barrier between themselves and the lower classes. Was it a matter of taste, or was it a matter of power? As you breathe in the perfumed air of the Great Hall, you can't help but feel a little overwhelmed. The pea in this context is no longer just food. It is a vehicle for these complex scents. Its earthy flavor is the perfect base for the explosion of spices, a humble canvas for a grand olfactory masterpiece. The perfumed air of the Great Hall is a world away from the constant danger that lurks just behind the kitchen doors. We've talked about the cooks and the scullions, but we haven't talked about the central character of the kitchen, the one that makes everything possible, the kitchen fire. Cooking with a large open fire is not just a job, it's a dangerous business, a constant battle against sparks, smoke, and the ever-present threat of a catastrophic blaze. And when you're cooking a great pot of peas, you have to be particularly careful. Imagine a massive stone-lined hearth with a fire that is big enough to roast a whole pig. Iron pots hang from chains, and the heat is so intense that the air shimmers. The cooks and their assistants are in constant motion, stirring, basting, and adding wood to the fire. A mainstream historical fact is that kitchen fires were a major cause of death and destruction in the Renaissance, often leading to the complete loss of the manor house or castle. The risk was so great that many kitchens were built as separate, detached buildings from the main house, a kind of sacrificial lamb in case of a fire. There's a quirky tidbit here about the specific dangers of cooking peas. When you are cooking a large pot of dried peas, they have a tendency to stick to the bottom of the pot, and if they burn, they can create a thick, acrid smoke that can fill the entire kitchen and pose a serious health risk. The scullions would have to be on constant watch, stirring the pot with a long wooden paddle to prevent this from happening. It was a tedious and dangerous job, a testament to the fact that even the most basic of foods required constant attention and a certain amount of bravery to prepare. Historians still argue whether the constant threat of fire in the kitchen contributed to the high turnover rate of kitchen staff. Was it the danger itself that drove them away, or was it the long hours, the low pay, and the grueling conditions? As you watch the cooks work with a quiet, focused intensity, you can see all of these factors at play. The kitchen, it seems, is a place of both creation and destruction, a space where a magnificent meal and a catastrophic fire are only a moment away from each other. And the pea, in this context, is a kind of living timer, a humble food that, if left unattended, could be the spark that brings a great house to its knees. The ever-present threat of fire in the kitchen is a daily danger. But there is another, more insidious threat that could sweep through a town or a country with a silent and deadly efficiency: the plague. In times of widespread disease, the pea, that humble legume, took on an even more crucial role. When the world outside your walls becomes a place of fear and death, the non-perishable pea becomes a crucial lifesaver, a quiet hero in a time of immense suffering. Imagine a city in the grip of the Great Plague. The streets are empty, the shops are closed, and no one dares to leave their homes. The usual supply chains have broken down, and fresh food is impossible to come by. This is a time when the foresight of a well-stocked larder, a larder full of sacks of dried peas, becomes a matter of life and death. A mainstream historical fact is that during epidemics, non-perishable foods were a primary means of survival. The dried pea, with its long shelf life, was a perfect food for these times. It could be stored for years without spoiling, ensuring that even when the outside world was collapsing, you and your family would still have something to eat. There's a quirky tidbit here about the plague diet. Physicians would often prescribe a specific diet to people who were sick or who were trying to avoid getting sick. This diet would often consist of simple, easily digestible foods, and the pea, prepared as a bland porridge, was a central part of it. The idea was to not upset the humors of the body, and the pea, with its cold and dry properties, was thought to be a safe and healthy food for these difficult times. Historians still argue whether the ability to store food for long periods of time led to a greater chance of survival during these epidemics. Did the dried pea, in its quiet way, help to save lives? Or were the plagues so devastating that food supply was a secondary concern? As you watch your servants carefully rationing the peas from the larder, you can see that it's all that stands between your family and starvation. The pea, in this context, is no longer just food. It is a symbol of hope, a tangible sign that you have a fighting chance against a force that is beyond your control. The pea, it seems, is a testament to the power of preparation, a simple food that holds the key to both sustenance and survival. The pea's role in a plague-stricken city is a powerful image of survival. But let's move from the dark reality of a plague-ridden world to the vibrant, idealized world of art. The Renaissance was a time of immense artistic flourishing, and the pea, in its quiet way, sometimes found its way into the works of the great masters. This is the world of the modern. A place where the pea is no longer just food, but a symbol, a detail, a small but meaningful part of a larger composition. Imagine an artist, a master of still life, setting up their next painting. On a table covered with a rich, embroidered cloth, they place a silver bowl, a loaf of bread, a half-eaten pomegranate, and a small, delicate dish of peas. A mainstream historical fact is that still life paintings often use food as a form of symbolism, with each object carrying a specific meaning. The pomegranate might represent fertility, the bread might represent life, and the peas might represent, well, that's where it gets interesting. There's a quirky tidbit here about the dual symbolism of the pea. In some still life paintings, the pea was used as a symbol of the brevity of life, a reminder that all things, even the most delicious foods, are fleeting. In others, it was used as a symbol of hope and renewal, a reminder that new life springs from the earth every year. This dual meaning makes the pea a fascinating and subtle subject for an artist. A single pea could hold the weight of both life and death, a testament to the artist's ability to imbue the mundane with immense meaning. Historians still argue whether the inclusion of such common foods in still life paintings was a deliberate choice to ground the art in a sense of realism, or if it was simply a matter of convenience. Was the artist trying to make a profound statement about life and death, or were they just painting what was on their table? The answer, as with most things in the Renaissance, is probably a mix of both. The artist was a master of their craft, and every object in their painting was there for a reason. The pea, in this context, is no longer just food. It is a symbol, a small, round object that holds a world of meaning in its quiet, unassuming form. The pea's symbolic life in still life paintings is a beautiful testament to its versatility. But let's leave the quiet world of art for the harsh, unforgiving reality of the open sea. In the Renaissance, a noble's life wasn't just about manors and gardens. It was also about trade, exploration, and sometimes war. When you're a sailor on a long voyage, food isn't about pleasure or symbolism. It's about pure, unadulterated survival. And on the high seas, the pea was a crucial lifesaver, a humble legume that prevented two of the greatest scourges of maritime life: starvation and scurvy. Imagine a small ship, a caravel or a galleon, tossed about on the endless, gray expanse of the Atlantic. The days turn into weeks, and the weeks into months. The fresh food you brought with you has long since run out, and your diet has become a monotonous rotation of hardtack and salted meat. A mainstream historical fact is that scurvy, a disease caused by a lack of vitamin C, was a major killer of sailors on long voyages. The symptoms were brutal bleeding gums, open sores, and eventually death. But there was a surprising solution, and it was often found in the ship's larder. The pea, particularly the dried pea, was a crucial part of a sailor's diet. While not a rich source of vitamin C, the peas and their sprouts could provide a small but vital amount of the vitamin, and they were also a calorie-dense food that could prevent starvation. There's a quirky tidbit here about the pea soup on ships. The sailor's pea soup was often called peas pudding, a thick, dense paste that could be eaten with a spoon or even cut into slices and eaten with a knife. It was a no-frills, utilitarian meal, but it was a meal that kept you alive. And sometimes, in a moment of extreme need, the sailors would try to sprout the dried peas, eating the tiny green shoots to get a much-needed dose of vitamin C. It was a desperate measure, but a smart one, a testament to the ingenuity of people in a desperate situation. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of dried peas and other legumes on ships was a deliberate effort to combat scurvy or simply a practical choice for a non-perishable food. Was it a form of early medical knowledge, or was it a happy accident? The pea, in this context, is no longer just food. It is a medicine, a tool of survival, a small but vital part of the vast and dangerous world of maritime exploration. The pea's role on the high seas is a powerful story of survival, a testament to its practical utility. But now, let's bring the story home, back to the heart of the noble's world, the Rive family dinner. The evening meal, unlike the bustling breakfast or the grand feast, was a more intimate affair. It was a time for family, for reflection, and for the patriarch to assert his authority. And in the center of this ritual, you would often find the humble pea, a quiet but essential part of the evening's proceedings. Imagine a large dining room, a long wooden table lit by the warm glow of candles. Your family's gathered, and the atmosphere is one of quiet formality. The food is brought in and placed on the table, and before anyone begins to eat, a prayer is said. A mainstream historical fact is that prayer before and after a meal was a standard practice. For all social classes in the Renaissance, it was a moment to give thanks for the food and to acknowledge God's bounty, a ritual that reinforced the family's piety and their place in the divine order. The pea, in this context, is a kind of physical manifestation of that bounty, a tangible sign of God's grace. There's a quirky tidbit here about the role of the patriarch at the dinner table. It was his job to carve the meat and to serve the food, a task that was both a sign of his authority and a demonstration of his care for his family. He would make sure that everyone, from his wife to his youngest child, received their proper share, and he would often serve the pea dish himself, a kind of paternal gesture that reinforced his role as the provider. The pea, in this context, is no longer just food. It is a tool of family governance, a way for the patriarch to exercise his power and his love. Historians still argue whether the family dinner, with its prayers and its rituals, was a genuine source of family cohesion or a more performative display of social order. Was it a moment of real connection, Or was it just another part of the endless performance of noble life? As you sit at the table, listening to your father say grace, you can feel both truths at once. You are a family, yes, but you are also a noble family. And every action, even the simple act of eating, is a reminder of your status and your responsibilities. And the pea, in its quiet, unassuming way, is a central part of that reminder. A food that is both a symbol of sustenance and a testament to the power of tradition. The family dinner, with its prayers and rituals, is a scene of quiet tradition, but the world, as we know, is always in motion, always changing. The Renaissance, a period of immense transformation, was also a time when the first seeds of the future were being sown. We're going to take a small peek into that future, a glimpse of how food will change in the coming centuries, a world where the pea's dominance will slowly begin to wane. This is the end of an era, Rom, a time when new tastes, new technologies, and a new way of thinking about food will begin to take hold. Imagine a kitchen in the late 17th century, a time just beyond the Renaissance. The hearth is still there, but a new kind of utensil, a small, multi-pronged fork, is now a standard part of the table setting. The food is still rich and hearty, but new flavors, like chocolate and coffee, are beginning to appear in the Great Hall. A mainstream historical fact is that the Maimona 17th and 18th centuries saw a massive increase in the availability of new and exotic foods from around the world. The age of exploration was bringing a constant stream of new ingredients back to Europe, and the palates of the nobility, and eventually the lower classes, were changing. There's a quirky tidbit here about the pea itself. As new vegetables, like the potato, became more popular, the pea began to lose its status as a culinary workhorse. It was no longer the centerpiece of the meal, but a side dish, a humble accompaniment to a more glamorous main course. The mushy pea, the staple of the peasant, would continue to be a source of sustenance, but the noble's pea, the spiced, sugared, and sculpted pea, would become a thing of the past. The pea's reign as a symbol of status and wealth was slowly coming to an end. Historians still argue whether the decline of the pea's dominance was a sign of culinary progress or a loss of a certain kind of tradition. Was it a good thing that people were eating a more varied diet, or was something lost when the pea, with its rich history and its deep symbolic meaning, was relegated to a side dish? As you get this glimpse of the future, you can't help but feel a little bit of both. You are excited by the new flavors and the new possibilities, but you also feel a sense of nostalgia for the world of the pea, a world that you know is slowly but surely fading away. The glimpse of the future, with its new foods and new sensibilities, marks the beginning of the end for the mushy pea as a culinary king. The pea's long reign, a period of centuries where it was a staple, a symbol, and a source of both survival and status, is slowly drawing to a close. But we can't just let it go without a proper goodbye. We need to look back and understand our debt to the pea, a humble legume that helped to shape our culinary history in ways we might not even realize. Imagine a modern dinner table. You might have a bowl of steamed peas as a side dish, a vibrant green addition to your plate. You might even have a pea and ham soup, a classic comfort food. But do you ever stop to think about the journey of that pea, a journey that started in the fields of the Renaissance? A mainstream historical fact is that many of our culinary traditions and staple dishes have their roots in the Renaissance. And the pea is a perfect example of this. The idea of a thick, hearty soup, a dish that sticks to your ribs and warms you from the inside, is a direct descendant of the pea porridge that sustained a civilization. There's a quirky tidbit here about the pea and its place in our modern vocabulary. We still use the phrase like two peas in a pod to describe two things that are very similar, a phrase that is a direct callback to the pea's role as a symbol of unity and togetherness. It's a small, subtle reminder of the pea's enduring legacy, a linguistic echo of a world that is long gone. Historians still argue whether the culinary innovations of the Renaissance, many of which were centered around the pea, were a necessary step in the evolution of our modern diet or a more decadent and unnecessary detour. Did the spicing and sugaring of the pea lead to a more refined palate? Or did it just create a taste for overly sweet and complex flavors? As you look back on the pea's long and varied history, you can see that it's a bit of both. The pea was a canvas for culinary experimentation, a simple food that allowed a generation of cooks and diners to explore new tastes and new possibilities. We owe a debt to the pea, a debt that goes far beyond a simple bowl of soup. We owe it a debt of gratitude for helping to shape the way we eat and the way we think about food, even today. The modern echo of the pea's history is a subtle and beautiful thing, but we need to go back in time one last time. We are returning to the Renaissance, to the time when the pea was a staple, and we are going to experience the heat final supper. A fading flavor, a last taste of a world that is about to disappear forever. This isn't a grand feast or a public spectacle. It's a quiet meal, a moment of reflection at the end of a long day, where the taste of mushy peas is a memory that is about to fade with the end of the Renaissance. Imagine a kitchen hearth, the fire now banked and glowing with a soft, warm light. The great pots have been cleaned and put away, and the air is no longer thick with the smells of 100 different dishes. A small pot of peas, a final bit of leftover from the day's meal, is being warmed for a final bite. A mainstream historical fact is that food waste was a serious concern in the Renaissance, and every last scrap of food was either eaten, given to the servants, or fed to the animals. The idea of throwing away food would have been unthinkable. The final supper, then, is a meal of practicality, a final gesture of respect for the food that has sustained you and your family. There's a quirky tidbit here about the final spoonful. In some households, it was a tradition to save the last spoonful of pea pottage for the head of the house, a small gesture of respect and a way of ensuring that he, the provider, had the last word on the day's sustenance. It was a small, quiet ritual that spoke volumes about the family's social order and their relationship with food. Historians still argue whether the decline of the mushy pea as a staple food was a sign of a more refined palate or a loss of a certain kind of humility. Was it a good thing that the nobility's diet became more varied and less reliant on a single food? Or was something lost when they turned their backs on the pea? A food that had sustained them for generations. As you take that final spoonful of peas, you can taste the long history of your family, the struggles, the feasts, the plagues, and the wars. The pea is a silent witness to it all, a food that holds the memory of a world that is slowly but surely fading into the past. The taste is not just the taste of food, it's the taste of history itself. The taste of history, that final spoonful of mushy peas, is a powerful memory. But now, we have to let it go. We are moving from the specific moment of the final supper to a more general sense of closure. The Renaissance, with its passion for the pea, is a fading memory. New foods, new ideas, and new ways of living are on the horizon. The dominance of the mushy pea is slowly ending as new foods and tastes emerge, forever changing the way people eat. Imagine a kitchen in the early 18th century. The pea is still there, of course, but it's no longer the star. The potato, that strange new vegetable from the Americas, has finally begun to gain traction. It's cheap, it's easy to grow, and it's incredibly versatile. A mainstream historical fact is that the very widespread adoption of the potato ham in Europe, particularly in Ireland and Germany, would eventually lead to a massive population boom and would forever change the European diet. The mushy pea, once a food of both the poor and the rich, is now a food of the past. There's a quirky tidbit here about the pealess noble. As new foods became more available, the nobility, in their endless quest for novelty, began to move away from the pea. A noble's dinner party in the 18th century would be a showcase of new and exotic foods, a world away from the spiced and sugared pea dishes of the Renaissance. It was a kind of culinary amnesia, a forgetting of the food that had sustained their families for generations. Historians still argue whether the decline of the pea's culinary status was a good thing or a bad thing. Was it a sign of a more diverse and interesting diet, Or was it a kind of cultural loss, a forgetting of a food that had a rich and deep history? The answer, as with most things, is probably a mix of both. The pea's long reign as a culinary king is over, but its legacy is still very much with us, in our culinary traditions, in our language, and in our collective memory. The pea's long decline from culinary dominance is a story of a changing world, but its lasting legacy is still very much with us. The humble pea, that unassuming legume, has left a subtle but enduring echo in the way we eat and think about food, a quiet testament to its centuries-long reign. Imagine our modern world, filled with a dizzying array of foods from every corner of the globe. But look closely, and you'll see the pea's influence everywhere. A mainstream historical fact is that our modern preference for a diverse and balanced diet, with its emphasis on vegetables and legumes, has its roots in the Renaissance's shift away from the monotonous, grain-heavy diet of the medieval period. The pea, in its various forms, was a central part of this shift, a food that showed people that vegetables could be both nourishing and delicious. There's a quirky tidbit here about the pea's enduring presence in popular culture. Remember the fairy tale of the princess and the pea, a story of a pea so sensitive it could keep a princess from sleeping. This is a direct echo of the pea's long history as a symbol of status and delicacy. The pea, once a food of the common man, became a symbol of the ultimate in refined sensibilities. Historians still argue whether the pea's legacy is a good thing or a bad thing. Is it a testament to our culinary evolution, or a reminder of a simpler, more difficult time? The pea, it seems, is a mirror, and what it reflects is our own complicated relationship with food, with history, and with ourselves. It is a reminder that the most basic of things can have the most profound of impacts. The pea's impact is still subtly present in the way we eat and think about food, a quiet echo of a world that is long gone. The night is drawing to a close, and our journey through the Renaissance has reached its end. The flickering candlelight in the great hall has been snuffed out, the last of the pea pottage has been eaten, and the great castle is now silent, save for the soft hoot of an owl in the distance. The world we've explored tonight, a world of nobles and peasants, of feasts and famines, is now a memory. But the pea, that humble legume, is still with us, a silent and unassuming reminder of a time when the most basic of foods could be the center of a universe. So, let the final image of the pea, a quiet echo in our modern world, gently fade from your mind. The sounds of our story are now just a gentle whisper on the wind, a quiet hum in the background. Take a deep breath, close your eyes, and let yourself drift away. The journey is over, the history is written, and it is now time for you to rest. Sweet dreams. Sweet dreams.